future outlook for Haynesville Shale Production. I'm Keith Mock. I am publisher of GoHaynesvilleShale.com, an online forum focused on the Haynesville Shale. We have over 20,000 members, most of whom are mineral owners and other stakeholders in the shale industry. I'm also co-founder of a new endeavor, ShaleCast.com. ShaleCast is internet-based software that performs royalty forecasting on a well-by-well basis, and we do that across several shale plays. I want to thank our co-sponsor, the Louisiana chapter of NARO, that's the National Association of Royalty Owners. On April 25th and 26th, NARO LA is having their state convention in Lafayette, Louisiana. You can visit narrola.org for more information on that. For our agenda today, after I introduce our guests, they will present their findings from the study. We will then move into a Q&A, and that will be moderated by Ben Hall, president and co-founder of ShaleCast. Many of you submitted questions when registering. We will work through those. I also encourage you to submit questions through the digital dashboard you see in front of you. If you haven't had the chance to read the Oil and Gas Journal article that prompted this webinar, you can find a link to that on the same dashboard in front of you as well. Our distinguished guests for today are from the Bureau of Economic Geology, or BEG, at the University of Texas in Austin. BEG is concluding a 4-year study to assess the reserves and to forecast production for the 4 largest gas shale plays in the U.S. That's the Barnett, the Fayetteville, the Haynesville, and the Marcellus. BEG's work has been featured in several issues of Oil and Gas Journal and in the Wall Street Journal. And I had the opportunity to hear one of our guests, Dr. Ikonnikova, speak at last year's EIA Energy Conference. She gave us an update on the outlook for shale gas plays, and that's when I also learned that BEG was close to completing their study on Haynesville, and we've been eagerly waiting the results of their finding. Though admittedly, I was not looking forward to their findings for Sabine Parish, where my wife owns minerals, and sure enough, BEG broke my heart on that. It doesn't look too promising for Sabine and Haynesville. Let me tell you a little bit about our guests before I turn it over to them. Dr. Svetlana Ikonnikova is a research associate and energy economist at BEG. She received her Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degrees from the Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology in Russia, and her PhD from Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany. She currently is involved with several interesting Alfred P. Sloan studies. She's a researcher in the grant water demand for 5 major U.S. unconventional reservoirs relative to water supplies. She's principal investigator in the grant Marcellus Shale Play Resource Assessment and Production Outlook, and she's co-principal investigator in the grant The Role of Shale Oil in Future U.S. Energy Supply. Our second guest, John Browning, has been a senior research fellow since 2010 at BEG. He focuses on modeling production and reserves in natural gas and oil shales. John is lead engineer for the group that is conducting the 4-year study I referred to earlier. The group is now conducting a 3-year study of the Eagle Ford and Bakken oil shales. He's retired from ExxonMobil after 33 years. His primary assignments with them were reservoir engineering, where he was responsible for reservoir management, reserve assessment, and development economics. John graduated from University of Tennessee in 1977. I guess that's the other UT, with a BS in mechanical engineering. And last but not least, Gurcan Gulen is a research scientist and senior energy economist at BEG's Center for Energy Economics. He holds his PhD in economics from Boston College and a BA from Bosphorus University in Istanbul. He's a member of the USAEE, the SPE, the American Economic Association, and the Gulf Coast Power Association. So with that, I will turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for joining us. The Bureau of Economic Geology has been actively working this for several years. Right now, we're still seeing the bios. If we could switch control to our computer, we can put exhibits up. First, I would like to just explain who the Bureau of Economic Geology is. Within the University of Texas, there's a long-standing school of geology called the Jackson School, and within the Jackson School, there is the Bureau of Economic Geology, and that is essentially the research arm of the Jackson School of Geology at the University of Texas. And they have about 220, I think was the last count I heard, PhD researchers. They aren't actually a teaching institution, they're more of a research institution. They're funded by government, by industry for specific projects that they take on. Why we're studying the shale gas plays is really it's because of funding we received from an organization called the Sloan Foundation. And the Sloan Foundation, the Sloan Foundation is a foundation in New York that funds research where energy and policy are two core issues around any subject. And if policy is being held up by a lack of understanding of science, then Sloan is interested in funding. You probably see them at the end of a lot of PBS shows, and who's funding the show? The Sloan Foundation is the funder. We approached the Sloan Foundation back in 2010, and they asked us what was the big question that needed to be answered in the energy space that was affecting policy across the country. And the answer that won that discussion was there was a lot of disagreement around shale plays, especially shale gas in America, that some people thought it was the greatest thing that ever was and was going to change the whole country, and some people thought it was just a complete flop and it was a hoax and would never amount to anything. And because of that, we didn't know whether the country was going to be well supplied, whether the prices were going to go up, whether imports would be needed, or whether the country would be self-sufficient and maybe even oversupplied. And what we convinced Sloan of was that the university was perfectly positioned to analyze the few largest shale plays and take a good look at what was really there, what was the cost to develop, and what the outlook for those plays were. And somehow Sloan was convinced to fund that effort, and for the last we did I guess it was a 3-year study that we're now 5.5 years into, and it's now expanded to include some oil shales also. But what we did was we started with the Barnett, we moved to the Fayetteville, then we did the Haynesville, then we moved into the Marcellus, and after that, we convinced them to fund some oil shale work, and we're closing down the Eagle Ford right now, and we're moving up to the Bakken, and we're entertaining a proposal now to consider going out to the Permian and analyzing the Permian. And what I'll show you in the Haynesville is summarized in the Oil and Gas Journal article, and this is pretty representative of the approach we've used in the other plays, and the types of products you're seeing on these plays is the same sort of output that we've generated in the other plays. The Haynesville, like I said, was the third one we attacked, and it was a very interesting play. It challenged us a little bit. We had to try a few things that we didn't need to try in the other plays. This is a play that is much deeper, much higher pressure, higher temperature than the other shale gas plays we worked. It's a substantial resource. Had quite a bit of activity, and it had built to quite a high production level, and so very important a play in America, and we were very excited to work on it. What I'll do is work you through a few exhibits that appeared in the Oil and Gas Journal, and I think I've got a couple of maps that didn't appear in the Oil and Gas Journal, so just to draw out some more information. What our general approach is, if you look at this first exhibit, this is just the structure map of the Haynesville play, which is straddling Louisiana and Texas just below Shreveport. And what you can see is that the shallower depths are to the north and the deeper depths are to the south. And it's really spanning depth ranges from about 10,000 feet down to 14,000 feet. The heart of the play, I'd say the core is up in DeSoto Parish area, and that's in the range of 12,000 feet. Interesting in this play, it's in the oil business, we call it below abnormal pressure, which means it's deep enough that the pressure regime has now gotten more intense, and the pressures are almost in line with the depths. So at 12,000 feet, you're getting pressures in the 11 or 12,000 psi range, whereas most plays you'll run across in America are in the maybe 4,000 psi or 5,000. So it's got maybe double the pressure of what you typically see, partly because it's so deep and partly because the gradient pressure to this depth is so high. The other thing that's interesting about the play is that the temperature is also very high, and once you get high temperature and high pressure in a dry gas, then the gas starts to act a little odd, and the compressibility of the gas becomes extreme. Also, the rock, it has so much overburden over the rock that as you draw the pressure down, the permeability or the ability for the gas to flow through that rock, the permeability can be affected by dropping the pressure in the rock and having essentially the overburden above the reservoir collapse on itself. So that's a challenge. The other thing that's a challenge in this field is because it's so deep and so high pressure, they're having to typically set an extra string of pipe or casing as they drill the wells, and that's taken the cost of the wells up substantially from other shale plays that we might look at. So at the time we were doing the study, cost in the range of $10, $10.5, $11 million was pretty typical. Now that the gas prices have collapsed and the oil industry is in a little bit of trouble, the service industries are in trouble, there's a lot of competition, and costs have come down. I'll show you some sensitivities in the $8 million per well range, and I understand people have improved on that even, so we can talk about that. But here's a structure map. You can see the area you might have particular interest in and see what sort of depth the reservoir is being encountered in your area. The next, let's see here. Okay, the next map, what we do is, go back to the structure map for a second. These dots on the map are locations of wells where we had very good log suites with modern logs that, in addition to the normal electric gamma ray logs, we had a full suite of porosity logs that were high quality. And these were the basic logs that we were using to map the field. In addition to the structure map, the next thing we try to do is we try to look at what is the porosity distribution across the field. And for those who aren't familiar, porosity is essentially the void space in the rock that's available for hydrocarbon to accumulate in. And in this map, typically in a rock in a conventional reservoir that's shallower, you could see porosities up to 20–25% porosity, 1/4 of the rock available to collect hydrocarbons. The shales are much tighter rocks with smaller pore spaces, and typically in shales you're seeing 3 to 10% porosity, maybe up to 12% porosity. This is a map across the field of the average porosity you would encounter from our analysis in every location in the field. And in the better areas of the reservoir, you're seeing 8 to 10% porosity, maybe a little higher than 10%. And in the poorer areas of the field, you're seeing 6 or 7% or less porosity. And the reason porosity matters is it's the amount of space that hydrocarbons can accumulate. And it's really that accumulation of hydrocarbon that drives the prospectivity or the productivity of the field. After we've mapped the porosity, then we take a look at the thickness, which is pretty easy. You can look at the thickness of every well in the field, and you can map the thickness across the field. But if you multiply the porosity times the thickness, then you get a map that's shown in this next chart, which we call a porosity thickness map. A lot of people call it a pH map, phi meaning porosity and H meaning thickness. And why this map is important is because porosity is how much space is available for the gas to accumulate in a foot, but you could have low porosity but have an awful lot of thickness and make up for that lack of porosity. Or you could have very high porosity but not much thickness, and it would limit the amount of reserves that are available for you to develop. So if you multiply the porosity times the thickness, then you get an idea of how big is the container in any square mile to accumulate hydrocarbons. And it's really this porosity thickness that determines how much gas is in place, and that has a strong influence on how much you can recover. And if you look at this, the porosity thickness number now doesn't mean as much because it's 10% porosity maybe across 300 feet, and so that would give you a 30 type number, or 10% porosity across 200 feet would give you like a 20 kind of a number. A lot of times in the oil business, numbers in the 10 range or higher are starting to generate very economic production and shales. And in this map, you can see two core areas of good porosity thickness, one up in that DeSoto Parish sort of area along the river, actually a little bit to the east of the river included in that, and another one down on the Texas side as you move down towards the San Angelo side. And as you go away from these two core areas, you don't get quite as much porosity thickness, and that means you don't have quite as much hydrocarbon in place, and that limits the productivity. And so really the core of this field is really driven by the hydrocarbon space that's available to accumulate hydrocarbons. You're helped a little bit as you move to the southeast from the northwest, because as you move to the southeast, you're starting to get pressure and temperature, and especially the pressure is allowing you to pack more hydrocarbon into that same pore space. So if you had a 12 pH in the northwest at shallow pressure, you couldn't get quite as much hydrocarbon in that rock as you can way down in the southeast, where you might be at 12 or 13,000 psi. You can pack a lot more hydrocarbon into that same pore space. So the pH tells you how big the container is, but next you have to take a look at the fluid that's trying to fill those containers. And that fluid, you have to know what sort of pressure and temperature it's at to know how much hydrocarbon is really accumulating. So what we do next is, well, let's see, we go to a calculation primarily using reservoir engineering principles and fluid properties, and we try to determine how much hydrocarbon is filling those pore spaces. And then what you get is an original free gas in place map. And this is essentially a map of how much gas sits in the pore spaces within each square mile. If you look at the units, we're going up to 160 billion cubic feet of gas packed into a square mile of this reservoir. I should have mentioned early on, we're only looking at the Haynesville. We're not looking at the Bossier Shale, which overlies, which also includes quite a bit of gas. Our study, because we had so much production history in the Haynesville, we were really studying that one particular formation. But here you can see this is the original hydrocarbon in place map. I'll flash back quickly to the pH map. Oops. Here we go. You can see that the hydrocarbon in place, the sweet spot drifts a little bit to the south in this map. And the reason is you've got that higher pressure that's packing more hydrocarbon into the pore space. So the higher pressure is offsetting a little deterioration in the pH. What we found in our other studies is that the hydrocarbon in place was a pretty strong indicator of the productivity of wells. If you mapped out the best wells in the field, they typically overlaid the acreage that had the highest hydrocarbon in place. on this hydrocarbon in place map, that principle ran true except for an area up in Cato Parish. You can see that area that's between the two sort of sweet spots as you move north into Cato Parish. That area on our log analysis had very good porosity and thickness, but the wells didn't perform quite as well. And we went back and looked at that, and what we found is that our porosity logs were giving an optimistic reading in those areas, and the reason is that there was clay in the formation in that area of the field, and that clay was actually hindering the hydrocarbons, their ability to flow, their ability to frack and remain propped, and it was hindering the hydrocarbon in place, and it wasn't being reflected on the porosity logs. So we had to go through an adjustment using the neutron and density porosity logs to identify this shale area in Cato Parish and use the two porosity logs to downgrade the porosity in that area to get a better view of what the original in place was. Just to show you, for those who are into logs, electric logs on the wells, this is that VH map again, and you can see this big black line running through the center of the field north to south. That's a line where we're showing you a few wells that we've pulled into a cross section which runs north to south, north on the left and south on the right in this, and you can see the blue shaded area is the Haynesville Shale. It's a little thicker in the north here, and stays relatively consistent at 200 or 300 feet thick. Overlying it is the Bossier Shale, but 200 or 300 feet thick of good shale with quite a bit of TOC, quite a bit of hydrocarbons in place, extremely high pressure and temperature. So an excellent reservoir, correlates very well. When you see it on a log, it's pretty unmistakable what you're looking at. So we've looked at logs, as I said before, across the entire field. If you take this original gas in place map, then the next thing we do after we've reached this point, this essentially tells us the full resource in place, and it's scaled here in BCF per square mile. If you've dealt with a lot of shale gas reservoirs, once you start to get to 100 BCF a square mile, those are some pretty impressive numbers. And because of the high pressure in this reservoir and the depth, you see quite a few areas that have that high of gas in place. You've got a little problem that the reservoirs are so deep that drawing it down to a real low pressure is not as easy, which affects your recovery. If you went across this entire map, and I think the map, I'm trying to remember how many square miles are in this map. Let's see, I don't see that in my notes here. Well, I'll get that.
The entire play?
Yeah, the entire play.
52.
There's 5,200 square miles in this play, and each one of these, believe it or not, these colored little squares, there's 5,200 of them. And if you added up the original gas in place and all of these square miles, we get a total of 489 trillion cubic feet, which is a very big number. And to date, I think we've looked at all the wells that are producing in the field by 2012, and those wells were on track to capture about 10 TCF out of the 489. So you can see that we're barely scratching the surface of the original gas in place with the recoveries of the wells that have been drilled so far. Once we have an original gas in place map, then we sort of switch gears. Let's see where I've got that. I'm not showing that yet, but we sort of switch gears and we look at decline analysis of the existing wells. And when we analyze the decline, there's a lot of ways in the oil business to look at declines of wells and determine the expected ultimate recovery from wells. What we found is that in shale gas, the gas is flowing linearly in the reservoir from the formation to these big fracture faces that are being created in the completions. And when you take that linear flow and derive the equations, what you find is that the production rate in a well falls off over time, and the rate it falls off is really proportional inversely to the square root of time. So if the square root of time, if you went from 4 years to 16 years, then look at the square root, that'd go from 2 to 4, then 1 over 2 and 1 over 4, you'd have the rate being collapsed in half as the square root of time increases. That happens for a while until the reservoir stops acting as an infinite reservoir and begins to notice that the other fractures in the well also exist, and then you enter what's called boundary-dominated flow, and at that point in time the decline steepens to an exponential decline. And so you get if you just use the front end of the well and forecast the future, you get a really optimistic number, but then you look at the interference and you see not quite as optimistic of a number. What I'm showing you here is we've divided the field into 10 tiers of productivity, and this is the average profile in in 6 tiers of productivity. This is the average profile you see in million cubic feet a day of a well in each of those tiers. In the better areas of the field, you were getting, for a 4,800 foot typical well, you were getting about 8 BCF, and down through tier 2, maybe 6 BCF, tier 3, 4.5, tier 4, 3 BCF. We went through every well in the field, which was 2,500 wells we looked at, and individually did their decline and looked at their distribution across the field and determined the remaining resource for all those wells. Those 2,500 wells look like we're going to capture about 10 BCF, and that was 10 TCF, and that was wells drilled through 2012 that we analyzed. If I go back up to the free gas in place map, if you took that analysis of what all the wells were going to make, you could then map that, and what we found is that this is a map called 20-year natural gas productivity, and this is our estimation for every square mile in the field. If you drilled a typical 4,800 foot well, this was using technology 2 or 3 years ago now, but this is the expected EUR in BCF of every square mile in the field. And in the bright red areas, this is divided into 6 colors, which we call our productivity tiers. The very best areas are getting on the order of 15 BCF on the high side, 7 to 15 BCF in the red areas, and as you go down, you get some areas that would recover 2 BCF or less for a typical well. And this map, if you look at what actually happens, the results vary around these numbers. You have wells side by side. One will be great and one won't be quite as great. So there is variability. And also how you complete the well and what approach you take affects it. So if you used a larger completion, more water, more proppant, then you'll do better. Less, you'll do worse. If you make a longer well rather than 4,800 feet, then you can do better. If you use a shorter well, then it might slide off from this a little bit. But we normalized all the production to a 4,800 foot standard, and we had a statistical process in order to do that, to give our anticipation of what every square mile in the field could generate. This is a plot that not many would understand, but if you, in our analysis, I mentioned that in the early part of the well, it looks like a square root of time decline, and in the late part of the well it looks exponential. This red area in this plot is, I'm plotting recovery factor versus the square root of time, and I've normalized both scales, and this red area is 2,500 wells all plotted on the same plot, or roughly 2,500, is probably a few less than that. And you can see that these wells largely follow this black line, which is the theoretical solution. And what I was saying earlier is that in the early life, below 1 on this scale, the line is pointing to a very high recovery, but then the line rolls over. And so you don't get quite as much as it looks like you're going to get in the beginning because of this interfracture interference issue. I think that in the early going of this field, the producers were a little overly optimistic. They saw the front end of these wells and were predicting extremely high recoveries. And as the interfracture interference began to show itself, it became clear that the wells were great, but they weren't quite as great as people were pitching them in those early days. And I think over the last few years, you've seen a little more a little less optimism, a little more realism drift into it. Still great wells, but not quite as good as they look in the initial going. As I said, we map out the recovery factors, and we look at every area of the field, and we look at what could be recovered in each area of the field. Then we look at all the wells that have been drilled. We look at the area those wells have drained. And then we look at the undrained area and how many wells it would take to drill that undrained area. And when we do that, we get a location inventory of all the wells that remain to be drilled in the field in our estimate. We also have a prediction of how good those wells would be. If we know about the cost to drill those wells and the pricing environment, then we're in a position to run economics on all those future wells. And when we do that, we come up with this chart, and this chart shows spread across the 6 tiers with the best wells in Tier 1 and the worst wells in Tier 6. This is the number of locations from the beginning of the field that we think this field contains. And this adds up to about 35,000 locations, even though by 2012 they'd only drilled about 2,500 wells. In blue are the number of wells that have been drilled. In red are in the square miles that have been tested by these blue wells, how many locations remain. And then in green, there were locations back in 2012 that had not even been drilled yet, and or blocks or sections that had not even been drilled yet, and they also contain quite a few locations. Since then, people have drilled a lot of the green area up and tested it, and it's now, we would portray this slightly different right now. But the view is that we've drilled all the blue. They're working their way through the red and green through the depletion of this field. And for each of these, we have economics that of what it would cost to break even in drilling these wells. And well, first, just show you the typical reserves again in each of those tiers. The average reserve is definitely not the max reserve in each tier. It's just the average. So you get some wells up in the 15 BCF range in Tier 1, even though the average might be down closer to 8 BCF in the time frame of this study. Now that you know what the flow profile looks like, then for any price forecast, you could run economics. And when we run economics for each of the tiers, I'm showing you in this next chart the break-even Henry Hub price that would allow development of each of those tiers. And this is assuming a $10.5 million well, which was the norm when we were doing the study. Just as an example, in Tier 1, about a $3 price would get you a 0% return in Tier 1 with a $10.5 million well, and maybe a $4 price at Henry Hub would get you a 20% return. And I drew a black line here as a $4 gas price, which was one of the cases we ran in the study. And at that time, Tier 1 and 2 were attractive, but there were an awful lot of reserves that sat in Tier 3 and 4, which were struggling to be attractive. Since then, there's been a collapse in oil prices and gas prices. The cost of drilling has come down because of competition in the service companies. If you used an $8 million well rather than a $10.5 million well, you'd drop these curves from 50 to 70 cents a million cubic feet, or a million BTUs. So the $3 might turn into be a 230 or a 250 type number for that Tier 1 break even at 0% return. Once we've got these economics for all the tiers, we're in a position to do a model. We know all the locations. We know the economics of all those locations. We know a pace of drilling that's been occurring. We know how that pace of drilling has reacted to price changes in the past. We can build a production model. and that's what this next chart shows. This next chart shows in million cubic feet a day on the left axis in years going forward what we think the future production of this field looks like. We think that in the price collapse that this field they had to back off, and that backing off has dropped the production rate in 2012, 13, 14, 15, and if you had a flat $4 price and $10.5 million wells, then this solid red area is what we think the outlook would be. We think that that there are a lot of locations that are attractive that people have backed off on that they could drill, and that those will ultimately get drilled, and the field probably will have a rejuvenation and has the ability to climb in production even in a low price environment. The $3 price was the blue line you see below. That would hamper production in the field quite a bit. We show you some other price forecasts, the $6 and the $10, that show that you could double the field's production if you get a good, strong price. In today's world, that looks harder and harder to imagine going forward. The EIA, the government agency that looks at this sort of thing, has their own price forecast, and that green line is their price forecast from 2014. And it shows the field would recover even under their price forecast. I show you a red line with some diamonds on it. That red line with all the diamonds is what would happen if we were drilling $8 million wells rather than $10.5 million wells to capture these same reserves, and that allows you at a lower price to meet these forecasts. And if you could get $4 price and $8 million wells, you could have quite a rejuvenation of the field. Right now we're stuck in the low 2 range, and that's really affecting the field quite a bit. You do have continuing improving technology that is driving down the break-even cost in this field. You have competition in the rig and service sector that's driving down the cost of the wells, which is helping out. And you've got people now experimenting with longer and longer laterals, putting 2 sections together, drilling 7,500-foot lateral wells. And that longer and longer lateral is allowing you to capture more reserves for a well, and that's offsetting some of the incremental costs. So a lot of people are experimenting with a lot of things, and improvement is occurring. We've got a level of technology improvement plowed into our forecast. The industry is probably beating that outlook, and they're probably beating us on the cost side from what we had anticipated when we did the study. But you can see quite a bit of reserves out there, and quite a bit of potential if the price were to rise. And the reason for that is there's quite a few areas of this field that are just outside the economic threshold. So you get a little bit of price recovery, or you get a little bit of technology, you get a little bit of length improvement, then you bring those areas of the field into play, and redevelopment could occur. Let me flip back here. That's a quick run through of what we did, just to tell you how we think it turns out. If you added up in our $4 case the reserves that get captured in this field, it's on the order of 46 trillion cubic feet in a $4 flat environment with $10.5 million wells. If you look at all the sensitivities around that, we could get a number as high as 72 TCF in the very high prices. You could get take 25% off the well cost in a $4 environment, and we could take the 46 TCF up to about 52 TCF. So the outcome of this field is dependent on price and technology, but we've given a pretty good shot at what that range is. And if you read the paper, you'll see a distribution of outcomes and what we think the likelihood of those are. Ultimately, out of those 35,000 locations, we're envisioning less than 10,000 of them being drilled in most reasonable price environments. You just can't get the economics to work for 2/3 of the wells in the field. About 1/3 of the wells potentially would be drilled, and that's still impressive. You still got 10,000 wells generating 46 trillion cubic feet. So impressive field, strong economics with a little price improvement, very strong economics, but right now the field's in a little bit of a waiting game in this $2 price environment. It's just hard to make much of anything work in a $2 price environment unless you get some extreme cost reduction and some extreme technology improvements. With that, I think I could turn it back over to Benjamin.
Yes, thank you so much, John. That was just a fascinating presentation, and I know resonating with the folks on the line already. Questions are starting to come in. Just what a tremendous amount of work as well, behind this study. Thank you for the detail to help us understand how you moved, from all of the intricate maps to the field-wide presentation.
Yeah, we probably had close to 10 people working for a year and a half, if not more, to do this work. So it wasn't a casual piece of work.
That is obvious. That is.
I think I was the only non-PhD on the team. So they were carrying me heavily here.
Well, anyway, just really great work, and look forward to diving into some of the questions here. Let me start off by saying, we've got really a mixed crowd with us today, and that's great. We've got a lot of mineral owners. That's the background of Go Haynesville Shale and ShaleCast as well. But we also have professionals, kind of running the gamut. And so I'll do my best to try and bounce between maybe more technical questions and those that are maybe a bit more general. So if you'll be patient with that, I think we can get a lot of good value for folks on the call. The first thing, while you mentioned your 46 TCF number at the outset, is that radically different from what folks were thinking about, in 08 and 09? And is there kind of a consensus around 46 TCF today?
The government, led by the EIA, does an assessment every year or two, and they're really limited in their. I think they have 2 guys who have to do every field in America once a year or something. So they have to collapse their approach down to a county average rather than doing a detailed mapping through the field. I believe the EIA had been carrying a number that was substantially higher, but when they carry their number also, they include the Bossier and the Haynesville in their assessment together, whereas we're only looking at the Haynesville. So it's a little hard to get an apples and apples with them, but they were touting numbers quite a bit higher. We work closely with the EIA, and they've looked at everything we've done, and we've compared notes, and throughout all our work, the EIA has actually decided to change their process and go more to of approach as far as analyzing within the county and not just at a county level. But there are numbers that are higher than these. But still, this is equivalent to the number we were getting in the Barnett, so it's in that range. It's double or triple the number we were getting for the Fayetteville. So it ranks as one, but then again, it might be a quarter of what we were getting in the Marcellus. So it's a very big field, not the biggest, but I would say there's a distribution of opinions, but 46 is not an outrageous number compared to what everyone else says, I think.
Okay. I think it's fair to say then there isn't another study out there like this anywhere else with this kind of level of detail.
Well, as far as publicly available, I'm sure quite a few people privately have done assessments that they sell, But as far as a public grinding through from a log analysis all the way through the reservoir engineering, through the decline analysis, through the production model, other than the EIA and their approach, you're not going to find many competing studies of this type.
In public, yeah.
In public.
Right.
If you want to spend some money, I'm sure some other people will give you a private view of this.
Well, you talked a lot about prices and how sensitive the Haynesville is in its future development to pricing, and I know the $4 per MMBTU was sort of a base case scenario that you had looked, and obviously things are different. I wanted to share with you folks the results of some work that we've done at ShaleCast recently, just to see, well, what are folks reporting from their royalty check? So this is kind of a bird's eye view of what we're seeing in the field right now, and I'm going to switch to the presenter here for just a moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and while you do that, I just want to kind of to drop a quick comment saying that all the maps that we're presenting, as well as the well economics slide that John was just showing, it's all for the normalized standard well, meaning that kind of it doesn't include the differences in real wells. Meaning if I would drill at similar wells, or if I try to figure out and compare the wells, that's how they will look like.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you're drilling a longer well or a shorter well, or using a larger completion or a smaller completion, you'll get a different result. And we can only get so granular. Within a square mile, even the rock changes, and some completions just work better than others too, so you get a difference.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that clarification. These, what I put up on screen right now are prices that individual mineral owners have reported to us over the last month from their royalty stubs, and so this is what we're seeing, right now, and I wonder, coming from $2.43 to $2.27, how much you'd expect your values to change in your study based on these type of realized figures across the plate. So that's one part of the question. The other is, we also notice that there's a fair degree of variability among the operators. I just kind of picked a couple here at random that we have some data for, and seeing this variation. This is just for one data point in October, and what people are reporting. Is that kind of variation amongst the operators also going to have an impact on the overall development or speed of development of the play, since there's the incentives are going to be different there? And how would you see this lower price that we just talked about here, and also the variability amongst the operators impacting the results of your study, if at all?
Yeah, you're seeing very difficult times with the gas price falling so hard this year, similar to what it did back in, I believe, 2012. The nation is clearly oversupplied, and we're waiting on demand essentially to bail us out of this effectively. But if you look at the break-even economics I showed you, the $3 break-even in Tier 1, corresponding with these low gas prices, you also had lower drilling costs, lower service costs, lower completion costs. Those are taking the $3 sort of break-even in the best tier down into the $2.30 type of range. So you're in the game in the better rock, even at these low prices. This distribution in prices, I'm sure for royalty owners, this is very confusing, how your neighbor over there gets one price and you get a different price. In our economics, we take the Henry Hub price, which is sort of the standard gas price in for America. That's where the NYMEX price is based, and to get to the price we expect to yield in the field, we subtract the basis differential from Henry Hub down to the location, and then there's gathering costs that we have to take off, and there's other expenses that impact the economics of the well that we have to take off. And different, depending on your proximity to the pipelines, depending on the contracts you've got for gathering, depending on whether it's proprietary gathering or third-party gathering, the net back that you get at a lease can vary. The distribution you showed isn't outrageous, you know, having 15, 20 cents of distribution between operators' realizations is not that surprising. If this was a $5 gas environment, that wouldn't seem like too big of a number, but now that it's a $2 gas in price environment, suddenly those differences start to matter a lot. Our view is that, and you can offset this problem of economics. I was just looking at a player's report, EP Energy, who left the Haynesville back in 2012, and here in the last year they went back into the Haynesville, drilled a couple of wells of normal length with new technology, and it improved quite a bit since they left. But then they ran an experiment and drilled a couple of wells at 7,500 foot length, and they're just testing those now to see how that comes out. And so to me, a better technology, a lower price environment, maybe moving to longer horizontal wells, still puts you in the game in the best areas of the field. So I don't view this as shutting down, but it is very, it's a difficult environment. The other thing that's affecting it is if you're going to spend $8 million to get a 10% return on a well, that's a tough environment to spend that much money, and if something goes wrong, you've lost the $8 million. If it goes right, you've made the 10% return. There are leases out there where the operator has drilled a well in the lease and he's holding the lease, and he's got another 5 or 6 locations in high quality that maybe he could get a 10% return. But if the price would just go up $1 or $2, then that 10% return would turn into maybe a 20 or 30% return. And why waste the acreage in the rock for in such a poor environment? I get the impression that some operators are sitting on wells that are barely attractive, that could be very attractive if the price would go up, and the acreage is held, and they might be sitting back just saying this play would be substantially more profitable in a better environment. Why waste the resource sort of in this bad of an environment? I get that sort of impression. The way I see in the best parts of the field, operators drilling one well in a section and then moving on. So that's going on also.
Let me take a mineral owner's perspective on some questions here real quick. I know a lot of folks who are looking at your maps and thinking to themselves, okay, where am I, and what does this mean for me? You know, and if I'm on the boundary of this, is that just because your study didn't go a little further? You know, is there still some life beyond those edges? And also, you know, how do I get a more granular view of this? Because I really want to see, you know, my specific section, and if I understand your results correctly, one of the key questions that a mineral owner would have is, what tier am I in my particular section, and then what's my belief about the future of gas price? Because if I'm in tier 4, you know, and gas prices are where they are, I can then say to myself, well, maybe there's not going to be a lot of infill drilling here for, you know, quite some time. And that might help me make some decisions regarding, you know, my mineral interest, whether I hold on to it, whether I sell it, you know, depending on my stage in life, things like that. So is there a way for mineral owners to drill in more to these maps and understand which tiers they belong to?
Well, that is, I view our study is particularly valuable to mineral owners, because the the biggest problem a mineral owner has is just a lack of information, and that they can't understand the geology, they don't understand the economics, they can't see the big picture. All they can do is cobble together a bunch of disparate information and try to get a credible view. And I think what we do is we do a ground-up analysis and just lay it out there so that no matter what level you are in your sophistication in this approach, it kind of puts people on a common page. I think ideally what you're talking about sounds great, but the truth is with the work we did, you can only be so good. And if this study has its limitations. It has its. There's a lot of variability out here. We're showing you a view, but around that view, there's a lot of variability. You really stretched it too far if you want to blow up and see that one little red block in DeSoto Parish where you think your farm is, and draw a strong conclusion. I think this will directionally tell you that you're in a good area that has reasonable economics, or here's how much the economics have to improve before you're kind of in the game where it's attractive to develop. You've got your own lease situations with your producer. The producer is under their own types of pressures of economics and financial pressures, and they've got competing acreage they're trying to develop. There's an awful lot going on other than just a pure map of what's even if we had a perfect map, there's a lot going on outside of that map. This field does carry a fairly high royalty burden typically, and that royalty burden is a lot of the burden on the economics. And so to me, there's some opening there in if the royalty burden was less, the economics would be better, but then the royalty owner would be worse off. So there's some opening there. I guess I would caution, I'd say take the study for what it is. It's shedding some light on a lot of things I hope that were murky before for a royalty owner. Just because we colored your block red and the farm next door was blue, I wouldn't go jump off a cliff. It could well be that his is red also, and yours isn't quite as red as it looks like it is. So you're getting a little more granular than we can drive a stake in the ground and defend.
Understood. Well, that's what the mineral owners are looking at and wondering. So thanks for the clarification. Let me flip to some questions now from the professional community, and thanks to those who've been entering questions there on the GoToWebinar panel. We'll try to just get to as many as we can. I know we're going to bump into time limits. There are just far more questions than we'll be able to get to. But let's see. So here's one from a professional. What are your views on larger amounts of proppant per foot during completions?
I think that's an analysis that Svetlana has done. Let her tell you how we analyze and normalize for different proppant amounts and different lengths of wells. Our sophistication has improved quite a bit since we did this study, but let us tell you what we did there.
Yeah, so the problem at the time when we did the analysis of Haynesville, it didn't have that much information about the Haynesville completions. So the frac focus actually started reporting the data only in 2012. So at that time we didn't use either the water data, and the proppant data were very sparse. So for that reason, the map that you see on your screen, it actually includes the wells that were normalized mainly to length. So there was kind of some normalization going on with respect to the rock, but essentially it's the length normalized wells, meaning that if you look at two blocks that kind of look significantly different, the actual wells might be very close, but we normalize them only for length. At the current analysis, and this is another reason why we would like to get back to that play and update our results, we do take into account the proppant and water, and what we see is that the lengths over the last few years become not a very good normalizing factor. So back in 2012 through 2010 through 2012, the production strategies between the producers were not so different. So essentially there was a correlation between the lengths, water and proppant, and we kind of were get away with that approach. But the last 3 years showed that with a changing price environment, the operators, some because of the constraints in their capital expenditures, some just because of their better investments into the technology, they become more inventive in terms of how they adjust their completions. So the map that we show probably will not reflect the current state of affairs from my perspective. Speaking from the experience of other places like Marcellus, like Barnett, and like Eagle Ford, lengths will not give you that much information anymore. So to answer your question in short, proppant plays a big role. And one need to analyze it. I cannot really say that more proppant will do you better, because what we see from other places that depending on the rock qualities, some rock would be more responsive to more proppant, other rock may be less responsive, meaning that you will get more back on putting extra pound of proppant. But again, this requires extra analysis, which we do plan to do thanks to interest of DOE in our studies.
And what we see going on in the play is that these people who are close to economic or just beyond the threshold are just actively looking at these and trying to decide, is it length, is it proppant, is it water, you know, what does it take, is it cost of the well, what does it take to get them over that hurdle? So in a way, this map presents a challenge. It says who's in there making money, you know, as they are, and who needs to adjust. And so there's so much resource in this field that sits just beyond the economics that it's really driving creativity and innovation. And I think you're going to see the producers trying a variety of approaches to take some of these lighter colored blocks and move them up into the red territory.
Yeah, on a positive side, if we look back to our outlooks, if you would ask us where we probably missed things most in terms of our assumptions, it will be fair to say that technology was one of the key things we were kind of underestimating.
Well, you said that there may be an update to this, so that's good news. And when you are working on the Marcellus study, some of these things will already be incorporated. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, in the coming Marcellus studies, which we will be releasing very soon, we do incorporate some completion details already, and we show the effect of those.
Okay.
And we would hope, I think it's over the next 12 months, we're going to refresh all of the studies with the latest data and the latest technology advances.
Yeah, I also mentioned a little bit kind of promoting what we do, that we currently finishing the Eagle Ford study, which we will present at the ERTEC 2016 in August in San Antonio. And there we will show essentially the new approach we take that incorporates all those details into what we do. So we substantially improve the detailization of our analysis. And we're going to apply that to all the shale gas basins.
Yeah, and you mentioned the royalty owners meeting in Lafayette. I'm actually presenting the Haynesville study at that meeting if people want another look at this.
Great. Let me say, and I know we're at time, but we've got so many questions that folks have sent in. I don't know if you folks would mind sticking around a little bit longer for a few more questions before we wrap this up.
Continue on.
Okay, well, I'll continue shooting then. From a professional, regarding the estimated original free gas in place map, how do you determine that there is less gas in areas with less or no well control?
What we do is we map the porosity thickness, we adjust for shale or for clay, we get an original gas in place map, and then we take all the blocks that have been drilled and we get an average performance in each of those blocks, and then typically we do a statistical analysis to look for the correlations between the porosity, thickness, gas in place, pressure, temperature, and and we use those correlations to expand the map out beyond where we have good well control. But we have pretty good well control on what the rock looks like, and we have quite a bit of control because this field was mature enough. There are 2,500 wells spread across it. You had a good indication of what an awful lot of the field made, and you could then correlate that with the original gas in place and with the rock properties, and use that those correlations to fill in the undrilled blocks. But your questioner is correct that the certainty is best near the well control, and the certainty falls away from the well control. But what you find, we've done this in several fields, and it's surprisingly a pretty good. So far, it's been a pretty good estimation of in the undrilled areas what sort of results are ultimately achieved.
Okay, well, thank you, and the questioner thanks you also. Keith, I believe you had a question come in as well. You want to shoot that one?
Sure. Earlier we were talking a lot about gas prices, and this relates to that a little bit. So a lot of companies are shutting in wells or choking back production. What does that do to the long-term viability of a well? Does it affect production?
There's a kind of a range of opinions on that. Some people think, especially in a formation like this, where you can get permeability reduction with drawdown because of the overburden pressure. Some people think that that if you take it easier in the beginning of the well, you really generate a higher EUR. If you don't go for max rates early on, and you're gentler with the well as far as how you draw it down. And theoretically, I think they have a point. In our analysis, it wasn't that clear that the effect was there, although a lot of people tout that effect. But it could well be, but we couldn't corroborate that from what I saw. We were lucky that back in the time this field was first developed, the price was high, and America was dying for gas, and things weren't choked back very hard, and so they were basically cranking as hard as they could go. Other operators, as the time went on, began experimenting with these slower production rates, and they are firmly convinced that they're getting higher recoveries because of that. I don't think we have a firm opinion one way or another on that, but if we recognize people are claiming those effects.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we are beyond time right now, and Keith, I think maybe if you want to wrap it up and thank our panel. It just really so I feel so badly. We've got a lot of questions that they were still in unanswered state, but I know folks who maybe didn't get all the answers you were looking for. If you would look for the handout that's on the GoToWebinar control panel, and download that handout, the PDF, and read the Oil and Gas Journal, you may get more clarity on that. And this presentation will also be posted later on by Keith and myself. So keep an eye out for that.
And also on that point, if you look at the bottom of the Oil and Gas Journal, it lists a lot of references. This was sort of a summary article. More detailed articles exist. So if you've got a very specific technical question, look at the references in the Oil and Gas Journal article and chase those down.
Very good.
And that's exactly what I was going to suggest, maybe following up with you, John, for people who didn't get their questions asked, perhaps following up through email. All right, well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us. We look forward to possibly doing this again when the Marcellus study comes out. And I want to thank our audience for tuning in as well. And have a great day, everyone.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.